Cool. What's up, everybody? Thank you for joining us. This is What Do You Mean the Capture Card Isn't Working? And Other Tales of Woe, How to Run a Speedrunning Marathon. All right, so introductions. Why you guys should listen to us? Well, actually, we'll just go straight down here.
Oh, okay.
We'll just go in line. Go ahead.
Cool. Well, hi, I'm CT Conquer. I am the head organizer of the Southern Speedrunner Summit.
Hi, I'm Proto Magical Girl, and I do varying roles of event management and tech for Buckeye Speed Bash, Power Up with Pride, Speedruns Rochester, Games Finished Adequately, and Games Done Quick.
Hello, I'm Mr. Shasta. I have co-founded Calithon, which is the West Coast Speedrunning Marathon.
I'm the Boix. I run my own marathon online called Valuethon.
I'm Konasumi, and I run a race against time and also help out with Valuethon.
Yep.
I'm Muncha Koopas. I help out with Calithon. I've been volunteering at Games Done Quick for a few years now, and I work at Yacht Club Games.
Yo, what's up? I'm Raging Cherry. I was the event director for Smash the Record, and I'm one of the main organizers behind Speedrun Chaos. Cool. So we wanted to kind of start off with venues. That's like a pretty big thing when you're doing a live event. Finding the home, for your actual event. There's a few things that you want to think about when you're looking at events, sort of the main objectives, which we're going with knowing market value, right? Are you paying too much? This is something that is as simple as reaching out to your local tournament organizers or other friends in the area. I've had events in the past where I reached out to a local organizer and he was able to send us like previous price sheets and make introductions to the hotels that brought our price down to work with our budget, right? So friends in the area, like they can help you way further than you would imagine. The one thing is when you're going and starting this on your own, hotels really like to take advantage, right? When you're someone who's new to the space, have never hosted an event live before, right? So there's a lot of different price ranges and hidden expenses that come up. So something to think about there. Location is another key thing, right? Being close to the airport, having food options nearby. That's like a really big thing that you want to make sure is it's an overall like event experience for your attendees, not just what's happening inside the room, right? Like obviously you want everyone who's there to be in the room as much as they can, or in the rooms, right, hang out, having fun. But you want this to be sort of like an overall like vacation for people attending your event. So that way they're going home and saying, yeah, like it was easy. It was 15 minutes away from. Never mind. It was easy. It was really close by. Like no issues whatsoever. Picking the right size for your attendees, that's another thing to think about, right? When it comes to floor planning, making sure that the event's not too big or too small, right? I've been in some events where, there's 100 people going in a super small room or 500 people going in like a 30,000 square foot ballroom, right? That's something that you want to try to avoid. So again, speaking with like previous event organizers is a big thing. A couple of things to think about, infrastructure. Whenever you go to an event, you have to think about things like staging, electricity, internet, security. If you're going to ship anything to the venue, they sometimes charge you for holding those. And some hotels will actually charge you for tables and chairs. So when you're going through those contract process, make sure like everything is included. I need 500 chairs, 200 tables, that sort of thing. Next thing would be having a 2-scale floor plan is key. That's one thing when it comes to these events, making sure all the infrastructure fits in the way you need it. There's a couple websites, one socialtables.com. It can also be done via Microsoft Excel, even though that's not my go-to, but I can explain that later. Hotel room blocks is another thing. If you know your event's big enough and you're going to sell rooms, it will help reduce the cost for the venue space. If you're just renting out a room versus renting a room and selling 50 hotel rooms a night, the price is going to change dramatically. And then another thing to think about is what can you do sponsorship-wise? Some venues have exclusivity. So for example, Red Bull versus Coke. I work at Red Bull right now, and there's some events that we can't enter because the venue is a Coke exclusive, which Coke owns Monster, right? And I've been working with Red Bull for 3 or 4 years on the sponsorship side, like not working for Red Bull, but working with them on it, and I had to turn them away for an event because we were at a Coke venue.
Kind of rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shasta online.
So one thing about keeping track of equipment for events is that if it's like a smaller event, you want to keep track of like who's bringing what and like everything like that as well. Because like you might be able to get like sponsorships like that all the time if you're like just starting out. That's something to keep in mind too.
There were also online venues you could have if you're doing more of an online marathon rather than an in-person one. So there's the speed gaming channel, which is available for, you'll probably see it with a ton of like randomizer races and such now. But you can also request to have them host your marathon there to get a better viewership, at least initially. Although I would definitely suggest creating your own Twitch channel for your marathon to help with some branding of the marathon itself, and then people will follow it
It's always a good thing.
when it's available. Yeah.
Cool. So next thing to focus on is sponsorships, how you can fund and even improve your event, right? Selling and presentation is a really big thing. Sponsors can, make or break a lot of events. And when you're thinking about, where speedrunning events are when they first start out, right? Like, it's not going to be where somebody just creates a new event and 1,000 people are going to show up, right? So you may need to work with sponsors locally and nationally to help the event, right? With Smash the Record in particular, right? The event is mainly funded by the 500 plus attendees that go for Smash Bros, and then we were able to fit in speedrunning into that side of the room. I did link a generic info deck from Smash the Record. I won't open it and go through it now, but it'll be this whole presentation will be tweeted out after this, so everyone can have access to look through it. It just kind of goes through metrics and a few other things. The main thing is that when you're selling and presenting it, right, you're going to talk about what metrics you guys hit, attendance, outreach, like who's attending the event, how many Twitter followers do they have, maybe Twitch as well, location of the event. That's a really big thing. And another thing too is you want to talk to them about event branding opportunities, right? You want to let them know what they're going to get out of this. Is it just going to be a logo placement on stream? Or are you guys going to do a specific activation with them? When there's donation incentives that revolve around the sponsors, right? That's a really big thing. The next topic to hit is you want to look for a partner, not just a sponsor, right? Find a partner who's going to stay with you and grow as your event grows. Don't just find somebody who writes a check and you don't talk to a week later. That's one of the most important things, because if you find people who believe in your event as much as you believe in it, they're going to help you grow, and ultimately, the event's going to be way more successful than somebody who just writes you a check. Another thing too I want to talk about is don't promise the world. You want to under-promise and over-deliver. Don't set expectations too high, right? When you say, hey, here's what you guys are going to get, you're going to get A, B, and C. But when the event's over, you're delivering D, E, F. You guys are the hero, right? And they really see the effort you guys put in. I'm not saying to undersell the sponsors, right? You want to make sure everyone's treated fairly. But if you find other opportunities to activate them even further, while on site or on social media, or maybe with the attendees, right? That'll help a lot. Another part I want to talk about is if at first you don't succeed, try again. There's a lot of sponsors that may not want to listen to you year 1 or year 2, but when you grow year 3 or your 4th or 5th event, they may come in at a really big way. There were sponsors we've been approaching since day 1 when Smash the Record was like 90 attendees, and they didn't come in until year 3. And that's where I want to go into the next point, tap into your local market. This can be anywhere between, local schools or colleges, gaming companies like developers, or even land centers. They can be your best friend. Smash the Record year 1, we had a ton of help from our local market. And I even reached out to a couple schools. One of the schools ended up not sponsoring us for 2 years, but the year 3, they were our biggest sponsor. So as long as you keep them in the loop, you're updating them every year, even if they're not sponsoring, they know that, you still care and you wanted to bring them on as a partner. That's a really big thing to consider with the event.
So for online marathons, especially, as well as on-site events, getting people to submit their games is obviously very, very important.
A little bit.
Just a bit.
You want to make sure that the tool that you use is easy to use and very accessible, also has a lot of features. There's 3 main tools that we'll be covering today that work the best in our opinion. The first of which is speedrun.com. I'm sure everybody here knows what that site is. They have built-in functionality for marathon events, so you can request on the website to have your marathon featured, and you can have a submissions page as well as a general area on the site for that marathon. And it's good because it has speedrun.com account integration, so you can view contact information like Twitter and Discord very easily. However, it can be pretty rigid and cumbersome to set up. For a race against time, we had a problem where there was no availability field. Apparently, you have to talk to site staff to get that enabled on your event. And yeah, that was kind of a mess.
with Valuethon on that, I had to actually create a separate Google form and request that people fill it out, and that just doesn't happen.
No.
Yeah, we
No,
did
if
that.
when you have to go to 2 forms, it's just never happening.
We did that for one of our Speedruns
No.
Rochester events, and no, I had to chase people down.
Yeah, it was. Ugh.
Yeah, it was a big mess. But yeah, that's really the big con for speedrun.com. And the second one we just mentioned is Google Forms. This is a really convenient option. You can get direct exports to Google Sheets where you can organize all the information the way you want it. But it's also a very manual process. You have to get people to fill out that Google form. And the third option is Super Marathon Maker, also known as Marathons.io. This is a brand new tool that is currently in development by Lord Mouse. He's making it to solve the problems that are on Google Forms and speedrun.com. You can export all the information into Google Sheets as well. It's very modular. You can customize it just the way you want. And the problem with it now is because it's still in development, it's not that accessible. You have to directly ask for permission. But as soon as it's done, it's probably going to be a lot more accessible.
Yeah, it's a really nice form. I've used it for a marathon now. It's been used for ESA
Yeah,
a couple
we.
times now, right?
Yeah, when I submitted to ESA this
Yeah.
year, they used this. It was the easiest experience I've had submitting to a marathon. It was on par with like GDQ's custom-built software for doing this sort of thing. It was really nice.
Yeah, we used it for Calithon as well back in March when we had
Oh,
that,
yeah.
and it was also very, very easy to
So I'm
use.
hoping that becomes the new standard.
That'd be really
um,
nice.
Cool. Game schedule. I think that was you, Mancha.
Yeah. So you've gotten all your submissions, and then how do you make an effective game schedule? You have all these games. Where do they go? So the first thing you want to consider, of course, is your opener. What is the first run of your marathon? That's incredibly important because that dictates like the setting of your marathon. You want people to come in and watch it, so you want something like that will get attention from media as well as viewers. Usually it's something like a new hype release, like Mario Odyssey. That's what we did with Calithon. Sometimes it's just a well-established speed game like Mario Sunshine. It's just good to pick something that you know people will automatically come in and watch because then they're already on the stream, so they're going to stay there most likely to see whatever you have next. Of course, your finale run is also very crucial because that's your last chance, especially if you're raising money, that's your last chance for donations. So you might pick something like a long RPG with a lot of naming incentives just to kind of get a little bit more out of your game. Of course, you can arrange blocks. We're all very familiar with like the Mega Man or the Mario block, but you can do tons of other things like an FPS block. You know, there's a whole marathon dedicated to first-person shooter games.
Shots fired.
Yes. That's what it's
Both
called,
literally
by the way.
and actually the marathon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with blocks, one thing to know is like be creative. Like at the recent event Speedruns Rochester did, the Speedruns Rochester Summer Fundraiser, we had a 2-game block called the Cute Characters Whose Names Start with H block. It was a Hello Kitty game and, oh gosh, what was the other one? Hamtaro. And it was just like, well, that's a block now.
You gotta
and that made those 2 runs that maybe individually weren't super exciting pretty marketable because like, come watch the cute characters whose names begins with H block. It's great.
I tried to do something like that at Calithon with a Saturday morning cartoons block.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I had
that
like
was a good block.
Shantae and Yono, the Celestial Elephants, and all that like right in a row on Saturday morning because I thought, well, what do you want to do on Saturday morning? Get some cereal and watch cartoons.
Yeah.
There we go.
As far as incentives go, you really want to pick incentives that are realistic. Don't pick an extra 30-minute run as a bonus to something that's already an hour long unless you know it's going to really get a lot of viewership. Something else is that you want to make sure that any incentives you take, the runner can actually fit into their estimate. I've been told by other I mean, maybe you guys would agree, maybe you disagree. I've been told that a runner's incentive should be included in their estimate.
I think I agree with that for the most part.
I agree too.
Like,
If they're submitting one anyway.
Usually when, for the events I do, we usually have them say what, they have to give us the estimates up front and tell us how long they'll take, and we just kind of factor that into the decisions on what games get in.
yeah.
That makes sense, yeah.
Another thing to consider is what happens if you meet all of your incentives in a day and you still have 2 more days of marathon left. That happened at Calithon this year, and so I walked around to every runner that still had a runner left and said, hey, what have you got for me? And we actually had a lot of cool incentives. My favorite was probably the F-Zero GX tasks that David provided. I highly recommend watching that. It's really cool. It's
It
about
was awesome.
yeah, it's about
very
6 minutes long. They all play back perfectly on console. Apparently, that was like the first time that had been shown publicly.
Oh man.
It was very, very fast.
Yeah.
And one other thing too, when it comes to incentives, don't be afraid to have some hidden incentives that that just pop up once you hit a certain milestone. At Smash the Record 2016, we had a quote-unquote hidden incentive where Crimson Blur, he works at Twitch as the Smash guy. He would destroy a CRT, and he's like known for being the savior of CRTs. He actually has a storage unit
Oh man.
here in Santa Monica that has like 60 CRTs. So we were in Twitch chat. We mentioned it once or twice on stream, and thankfully nobody like tweeted it out at him. But randomly he was sitting next to us and was like, "Hey, dude, we just met the incentive. You have to destroy a CRT." And at that point, you know, there was no backing out of it. And,
Oh no.
and we had this video that went up after where he walked outside, had a TV, he chucked it on the ground, and like it didn't break. We're like, "No, dude, you have to actually smash it." And so little things like that,
Oh my Lord.
you know, we've done where.
Did you name the TV the record?
No, no,
Oh.
no. No. We did end up replaying that video like pretty much every hour. Whenever we would go to commercial break, it was, "Hey guys, just keep this in mind." But yeah, think about like hidden incentives that sort of get unlocked on their own and surprises everyone, because that's another thing that really will make your attendees and viewers just be like, "Oh man, like what else is coming next?" And they'll talk about it more. They'll say, "Oh, another bonus incentive or something we didn't know about," that really helps get your event talked about.
So one thing to keep in mind when designing incentives, and this is a tip I actually picked up from one of the other Calithon staff people, is something we in marathon running call the 60% rule. I use this for all the events that I do schedules for, and it works out really well almost every time. The idea is that you take your fundraising goal, whatever number that is, and you make your incentives total 60% of that amount. That's really it. It's a number that works. I found in like every event I've done that it has made sure that like almost every incentive got met. So keep that in mind.
I think even GDQ's incentives are like 50 to 60%, so that's totally reasonable.
Probably, yeah.
So restreaming. So as far as, I guess this could almost be for online or live, because you're gonna be capturing it anyways with live. But
Capturing layer though.
yeah, with restreaming though, in order to get an online marathon working, obviously everybody's in different locations. So you have somebody in Europe, you have somebody on the other side of the states. So they can't obviously be there for your event. So you need to capture their video stream and restream it out onto your marathon channel. So one thing I thought was interesting is I've seen some new marathons and events pop up where they're not really using restreaming. So I want to go over real quick why that's a good thing. The main reason is that you remove everything from the equation that the runner needs to do except run their game. So you can handle the timer, you can handle the overlay, you can handle transitions, anything else you need to do to actually run your marathon. So doing that rather than, let's say, swapping every runner is obviously going to be a better idea. So in order to actually capture the stream, what I would suggest, first of all, is to set up your own rtmp. That's just exactly what Twitch uses when you stream to Twitch, for instance.
Stands for Real-Time Media Protocol, for anyone who cares. If you care, you're a nerd, but anyways.
So as far as setting up your own RTMP goes, you can do that for as cheap as $35–40. Just buy yourself a Raspberry Pi online. There's guides on how to do that. You can set up your own little server in your home, just connect it to your network. And then, yeah, you can have generally about up to 2 to 3 streams at one time on a Raspberry Pi anyways. But you can always go a little bit beefier if you want with a server. If you don't want to do an RTMP, I would very highly suggest actually doing an RTMP because you really need to.
Yes.
Yeah.
you do.
And if you don't, you're going to have a bad day or weekend or everything. But if for whatever reason that's not an option, some other options that have worked for online marathons is setting up like Mixer accounts on another streaming service, which is Mixer.com. They have a low delay option that you can turn on for the stream. So you can have your runners each stream to separate Mixer accounts, set them all up on those separately, and have a low delay, which is great if you have, let's say, commentators online that need to watch that stream. They can commentate with a low delay and still have some serviceable, actual useful commentary. If that's not available for whatever reason, you could set up like a Twitch channel. I would say that as a last resort though, just because the Twitch delay is still like 7 to 10 seconds on average. So if you have somebody actually watching that stream that needs to talk about it, it's just not going to work out. But worst comes to worst, nothing else working, it's an option.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I've been involved with done runs for a few different like online marathons, both Twitch, Mixer, and RTMP. RTMP is definitely the way to go, especially how simple it is to get set up. It is the easiest way to do it, lowest amount of delay for your commentators and everything. It's definitely go with that if you can.
Definitely.
And if you can't afford or don't have the technological expertise to build an RTMP server yourself, there's a lot of people in the speedrunning community who will essentially loan out their personal server for you. So reach out to different events on like Twitter and stuff and find out who they're working with and maybe reach out to that person.
Yeah.
The other thing to note about restreaming, when you're actually running an online marathon, or any marathon at all, you're going to have people running shifts to actually host that marathon. In the case of an online marathon, that's the restreamer. The important thing to note about that is, let's say I'm having a 48-hour marathon Saturday, Sunday. If I don't get other people to help me restream, I am sitting in front of that computer for 48 hours. You do not want to do that because I have done that, and that is very dumb.
Please schedule shifts.
Yep.
Please.
So before your marathon ever starts, before you get a schedule, anything like that, reach out to some people that can help you actually run the marathon and restream it and figure out a schedule for that time period, and then fill in the runs and kind of work the schedule from there. Because if you're going to be sitting there for 12 hours, I mean, that's a big commitment.
Yeah.
So.
It can be very exhausting and at times.
So that's all I really had to say about restreaming.
All right, so I guess this is my part. So I'm going to try and, this is a lot of information. I'm going to try and cover this really rapid fire. So before we get into this, though, I do want to talk about, one thing we're not going to talk about is like the physical setup for an in-person marathon. A quick tip I can give you is divide the workload among your technology as much as possible. So if you have PC runs, those runs better be on a different computer than one you're streaming from. In general, you want to be able to streamline everything to your streaming PC and have other jobs happening in other places. Okay, cool, that's it. There's tons of information on there about how to set up the physical parts, like the technology for an in-person marathon. That is a huge rabbit hole that we're not going to get into. Speaking of rabbit holes, let's talk about marathon audio.
Yeah.
This is I was still on the first slide. This is kind of my specialty. I do audio for Buckeye Speed Bash, Games Finished Adequately. I've done it for GDQ. So let's get into this. So first, let's talk about online marathons. There are kind of two methods. There's the runner's responsibility method, wherein the runner... so I guess to back it up a little, typically what you have for an online marathon is a stream of the runner's game feed and people in a Discord call talking about that run, whether that's the runner, commentator, or host.
Mm-hmm.
So the runner's responsibility method essentially entails the runner streaming their game, their mic, and that Discord call to your RTMP server. The pros of this is that it's good for runners whose games only work on desktop audio. In some ways, it can be a little bit easier, and I can't read the rest of my slides, so whatever. The big con of this, though, is if something goes wrong, it's really hard to troubleshoot. You have to have the runner stop their run to fix things. And the runner is probably not as versed in doing audio balancing and stuff like that. So maybe it might not sound as good. The other method is the restreamer's responsibility method, where the runner just streams game audio, and the restreamer captures their mic and their commentators and a host from Discord and puts it all together. The perks of this is that the runner can focus on their run, and the restreamer can fine-tune the balance and troubleshoot during the run without pausing anything. Okay, now we can move on to the next slide. So some quick tips for online marathons, some tools that might be useful to you. A virtual audio cable essentially allows you to have an input and output digitally in your computer. If you make a donation to the people that make it, it's donation where you can even get multiple inputs and outputs. That's really useful if you're restreaming. A virtual audio mixer is a little bit bigger of a software. It's actually like a little virtual mixing board that allows you to do similar stuff. And Discord's built-in volume adjustment. If you're in a Discord call and you right-click on someone, you can change their volume. That's a huge help for online marathon commentary. So now we're going to get in kind of the meat of this section is the in-person marathon audio. So there's, once again, I'm going to do this little pros-cons thing. There's kind of two methods here as well. There's analog audio and digital audio. So I'm going to start with analog audio. Analog audio often implies traditional microphones like this with XLR connectors going into mixing boards and equipment like that and then going to your computer. The pros of this is that it is going to give you the best sound quality, and it is extremely reliable. The big cons of this are, of course, it takes a lot of knowledge, it takes a lot of money, and it takes a lot of gear that most streamers wouldn't normally have. But if you have, if you manage to get a sponsor, or, you find someone like me who's an audio technician and is happy to bring their personal equipment to a marathon, analog audio is always the way to go. The other method, and this is probably what you're going to be stuck with if you're like a first-time small marathon, is digital audio. So that's typically going to be USB microphones like your USB Blue Yeti or A to D interfaces. And a lot of the mixing and balancing type stuff is going to be happening kind of in the computer. So the pros of this is that most of you who stream already have enough gear to make a digital audio setup happen for a marathon. It's cheap, it's easy to use because it's all just on the computer. The cons of this are it's not reliable at all. And if anything goes wrong, I can guarantee you're going to have to restart that computer, which means restarting your stream, and that always sucks to do. And it's also not going to give you as good of audio quality. I think that's everything on those.
Yeah.
So let's get into some fun stuff here. And as my part of like helping people get to know analog audio a little better, I want to talk about the basics of an analog mixing board, particularly the things you need to know for an online marathon. There's 1,000,001 tutorials out there on how to do this stuff more in general, but I want to kind of get into the basics. So the first, the long vertical box going on the left side, that's what's called your channel strip. It's an input and the knobs and buttons that modify that input. So you have whatever device is coming in. It's a mic, a video, like a game input, whatever. You'll often have EQ and effects that I'm not going to get into. And then you make your way all the way down to the bottom. And you have your master volume. So big tip, read your mixing board's manual. Please. I know it's scary and intimidating. And feel free to go find a friend who's good at audio to help you get through it. But I promise it is always worth it. So the box running along kind of the left side, the red box, that is the most useful thing for an in-person marathon. That is your auxiliary output. It's a secondary mix. So what this is going to allow you to do is have one mix for the runner's ears so they can have maybe their game audio a little higher so that they can hear it, and a different mix for the stream. This has a couple benefits, the first of which being the runner can have what they want and the stream can have what they want. But also, it allows you to do some more setup during setup time because you can kind of test the runner's mics and stuff with the auxiliary channel without needing to put anything out to main. And then the box up in the top right, those are your essentially various outputs. And most mixing boards are laid out generally like this. Again, read the manual, look at the schematic. This is a schematic from the manual of the mixing board that we use for games finished adequately. So you'll often have a lot of outputs, which is really nice because you have one output going to the stream, one output going to a speaker, one output going to a set of headphones that you, the audio technician, are using to mix. And somewhere around there, you'll typically have that auxiliary output that will go to the runner's headset. And finally, the blue box in the bottom right, that's your meter for your volume level. Use it. It's really helpful. Take the time before your event to get all of your mics and to get some consoles and stuff and test their volume and know where you need to set them to get a reasonable mix. Also test how loud your mixing board puts out. So you get all of your things leveled out so it's hitting, that 0 line on your mixing board, and you send it into OBS and suddenly it's distorting out and like super hot. So you need to know that stuff in advance. So you want to say, okay, I'm going to be targeting, 6 decibels under 0. Again, there's a ton more stuff on this sort of highly specific technical things online. This is the really important stuff to keep in mind. Next slide.
And keep in mind, especially with online marathons, like audio is super, super important, even at live marathons too. So all this info, make sure you guys go and look up on later.
Yeah, don't kind of forget about audio for a marathon. You'll spend a ton of time thinking about capture cards and getting the right computer to run things and designing fancy layout, and your marathon sounds like crap. Nobody's going to want to listen to it. Yeah. So I want to talk really quickly about gear recommendations. I hate doing gear recommendations, but these are some names you should know. So there's kind of 2 types of microphones that you should know about for a in-person marathon setting. The first is the kind we're using right now. These are essentially standing microphones, whether they're on a long arm or on a table, whatever. And the second is what you've seen on the GDQ stream is headsets. So both of those have their own pros and cons. In general, I recommend headsets for runners because then they just have a mic there. They don't have to worry about being in the right spot. They don't have to worry about, oh, they're talking really far back and now you can't hear me anymore. Stuff like that. So, in terms of gear recommendations, the Audio-Technica BPHS1 is the headset. Unfortunately, this is like the cheapest goods headset money can buy. It's $200. I know that's a lot. It sucks. Look into your local music stores. They might have some available for rental. The BPHS1 is the bog standard of headset. GDQ uses it. ESA uses it. Any marathon that I work at uses them. They work fantastically.
Calithon uses it.
Yeah.
I would be willing to bet Smash the Record probably uses them also.
They also used it.
Everybody uses
Everyone
go.
should use it.
Yeah, there's
can
no
afford it.
reason to get more expensive ones because the BPHS is just so reliable. In terms of standing microphones, so this microphone we're using right here is a Shure SM57. These things are like $80 a pop, maybe less if you can find them used on eBay. They're great. They're reliable. You can literally run this microphone over with a tank and it will still work. There's videos of it on YouTube. Go watch them. Additionally, the SM58 is also a good mic. If you're looking at if you want a little bit of better quality, you're going to be looking at condenser microphones. Look to what streamers use if you're looking for standard microphones. So something like your Audio-Technica AT2020 is really good for a marathon. And so what to look into for a mixing board. I'm not going to give you specific recommendations because there's so many boards out there. But in general, you want a board that's going to have at least a couple mic and line inputs. So you have your headsets or your microphones and your game. You want a board with something called phantom power. You can Google that. It's very important, but I don't need to get into it here. You want a board with a pre-fader auxiliary channel. So pre-fader essentially means that you have the second output that I mentioned earlier. That gets taken from the inputs before they go to kind of the main mix. If you have a mix that's post-fader, you're going to have your stream levels, and your runner levels are going to change based on how you change the stream levels, and it's just a nightmare, and you really don't want that. So make sure you can find one with a pre-fader auxiliary channel. And finally, just make sure you have enough outputs. If you're outputting to a stream, a live room speaker, a local recording on a separate machine, make sure you have all the outputs you need to do that. If you want specific board recommendations, come talk to me after the panel. I have a few that I like. Okay, we can move on.
Fair enough.
You survived the audio segment. Congratulations. So next I want to talk about social media. So one of the things I do with all my marathons is I do social media. I do it for Buckeye Speed Bash, Power Up with Pride, and Speedruns Rochester. And I would like to have all of you help me out with this
Yeah, of course.
thing to talk about, how do you do social media for a marathon and stuff like that. So the first thing I want to talk about is how often, specifically I'm mostly talking about Twitter, because in kind of this day and age of speedrunning marathons, people watch the stream on Twitch and follow the stream progress on Twitter. So the first kind of question is how often? In general, I like to tweet at least once per run, and if a run is longer, I try to tweet every hour to an hour and a half. I don't know if y'all have feelings on the matter.
I feel the same way, exactly. I feel like more hype runs of the marathon should be always tweeted out and always like hyped up as much as you can on Twitter as well.
Totally.
It's like your like
Completely agree.
primetime runs, your opener, your like Mario games, that sort of thing. Always tweet them out and like I hype them up all the time.
Your Elmo's number journey,
Oh yeah.
very important.
Right, and also keep in mind
Minor
with
Ultra Adventures.
Yeah.
incentives that open up or big runs that are happening like the following day. You want to create awareness as much as you can for those runs.
Is there a point where there's too much saturation though on the Twitter feed?
I would say
Yeah.
so. And it's something you can kind of gauge based on, the size of the account, how many followers. You can look at how many interactions you're getting on a tweet, and if you're getting less and less the more you tweet, maybe you're doing too many. I try to keep it to like once an hour in general, maybe a second one in an hour. If you hit a major fundraising goal, you hit, we just got $1,000. That's a big deal. If some really cool incentive is almost met, tweet about it. Okay, but let's move on to kind of the do's and don'ts. So I have some ideas. I'd like to hear from all of you on this. A big thing with marathon social media is that every marathon and every marathon social media worker has kind of a different style, a different idea of how you should do this. In general, one tip I can give you is do involve your audience. So instead of tweeting, we have a lot of exciting runs coming up this week, and you can watch all of them at twitch.tv/yourmarathonhere. You could tweet, we have a lot of runs coming up this week. Tell us what you're excited for, and watch all week at twitch.tv/yourmarathonhere. And when you get responses, retweet them. interact with your audience, involve people, do Twitter polls. I know Shasta is a big purveyor of GIFs.
Yes.
Yeah.
GIFs are fun. They catch people's eyes.
They really do. It actually really works well.
In terms of, I guess, like, your level of professionalism, that really depends on what your marathon is. I'm not going to say you should or shouldn't do whatever. I think a big thing is being consistent. If you choose a certain tone for your tweets, you should kind of try to keep it that way. I would recommend looking at various marathons' Twitter accounts to see kind of how they write their tweets. For me, when I write a tweet about a run, I like to try and include at least something minorly interesting about the run more than who's running it and what they're running. You know, it's a specific trick in the game, the status of donations, what incentive it has, something that will get people to click that Twitch link more than just, hey, here's a video game. Look at other marathon accounts, though. I cannot stress that enough.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Definitely.
One other thing to keep in mind too is utilizing photos and videos, and again using GIFs as well, because it's not only our audience, but if someone following me retweets it and his friend is scrolling through his Twitter feed and sees a giant photo with a room full of people, or someone's getting pied in the face, they're gonna stop and pay attention to it for a second, right? So make sure that you have some media supporting your social activity, and that you're tagging those involved in it as well, because it'll go right to them. They'll retweet it, and their fans will love it, and it's a really big thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing to note is a lot of people that are paying attention to your Twitter maybe aren't necessarily watching the marathon at the time, or just are kind of vaguely aware of it and just follow your Twitter for some reason or another. But posting really cool stuff that's happening, maybe good clips, just getting people excited to maybe tune in if they're not already tuning in, getting them interested. Because, I mean, people that are already watching the stream maybe aren't looking at your Twitter constantly, so you're really just trying to get to that audience that isn't currently maybe just lurking in your stream or watching, or new people. One thing we like to do is just post like kind of pictures of what's happening in the background.
Yep.
I mean, I know we just kind of do like a little kind of like fun stream. We don't do anything for charity or anything like that. So we just like to do a bunch of goofy stuff, and that seems to work. Having your people at the event retweeting your stuff so you can reach their followers is also really important. So people that maybe don't know the event's happening, and we've gotten a lot of viewers on that. Just like, we have, say, Darbian tweets out that he's doing his run and links our stream, and you get a lot of viewers that maybe weren't watching before, but they joined in just to watch him, stuff like that.
And so the final thing I want to talk about for the kind of the social media bit is staffing your social media account. If you're doing an event that's 24/7 for more than like one day, you need multiple people to be tweeting. You can't be awake that entire time, and you don't want your account to just go dark at 3 a.m. when you have that hot meme run that everyone who's still awake for no reason should definitely be watching.
Yeah.
You need people, so you should be getting volunteers in the same way that you're getting volunteers for restreaming or hosting. And a big thing with this is talking to them in advance and setting expectations. You've decided how often you think your account should tweet, what kinds of things it should tweet, the tone and the brand identity that you're trying to build. Set those expectations with your volunteers. Have people that you can trust, at least someone be awake around the clock, so that they can answer a social media staffer's question of like, is this tweet good? Is this too much? Etc. That's a tip for everything. Set expectations in advance for your team. That will help a lot.
Capture cards.
This is the fun slide.
Yeah.
And by the fun slide, I mean literally the worst slide.
Yeah.
So, capture cards.
Yes.
The only way that your viewers are going to be watching your marathon is with that capture card. So, if you don't understand what a capture card is, essentially, instead of plugging your video output, or in addition to really plugging your video into a TV for the runner to see, you also plug it into a capture card, which translates that video signal into a data signal that your computer can decode that OBS can visualize for your stream. So everyone on this panel, I'm sure, has love stories and horror stories of capture cards that they've used. So we've kind of compiled a little of a list with some notes, recommendations, non-recommendations on what capture cards you should or shouldn't use in your marathon. So let's start with the Microsoft cards. This would be your USB 3 HD cap, your PEX HD cap. These cards are rather expensive. They're really good quality. What's really nice about them is that they capture both HD and SD content. The big issue with these cards is that they're not super reliable. With some PCs, they tend to blue screen a lot. The drivers are really finicky. The menus don't always work very well, etc. So maybe not your best choice, but they're a pretty good choice. And then the most standard capture card in retro streaming is the IOData GV USB 2. It is like $25 to capture composite and S-video. It is cheap and simple and works right out of the box with a set of drivers. This card is what a lot of small marathons turn to for their SD content because, well, it works. A big problem with this card is that it has this really weird audio bug that seems to happen for some people's computers, and it will happen consistently for those and then not for some other people, and it's really annoying. And what will essentially happen is that at just some point in your stream, the audio from the GV USB 2 will just die, and every other audio source will turn like super stuttery, robot-y. And the OBS meters won't reflect this. The only way you're going to find out that it's happening is from your chat. So I don't want to say don't use this card because it's cheap and it's easily accessible. The biggest point I want to make for like this entire thing, especially all of this technical stuff, test everything. Get whatever PC you're going to be using, get whatever capture cards you're going to be using, test it intensively. Try everything that you're going to be doing. Do a test stream to a private account. Test like running the computer really, really hard with all sorts of different programs open. Make sure everything is going to work. And a final note with this GV USB 2 audio bug. For some computers, it can be solved by opening the GV USB 2 in something like VLC Media Player instead of OBS. Sometimes not, though. It's really weird. So, the never use cards.
Oh, boy.
Yeah,
Don't use an Elgato.
Never use
Don't
Elgato.
use an Elgato. And don't use a Blackmagic Intensity.
I think I've fiddled with my Elgato literally every time I've used it. So it's
They
great.
never
Yes,
work.
I have as well.
I know like 2 or 3 people that are like, I've never had a problem with my Elgato. And
How?
I don't know how.
Lying.
They are lying.
Yes.
They're
Don't use-
paid by Elgato to say that.
I have actually purposely avoided putting HD runs in the marathon to not have to deal with stuff with an Elgato.
You need a capture card. I'm sorry.
God, yeah.
Literally for my home stream,
Just
I
the
have a Blackmagic Intensity, and switching from a Nintendo Switch to my Wii takes maybe 30-40 minutes of troubleshooting. It's like I literally
Yeah.
streamed on it yesterday, and I have to change one thing, and it's one of the most frustrating things where now I just don't even stream like some of the games anymore.
So at the first Calithon, we had, I think, 2 X captures and Elgato, which was mine. The Elgato blue screen computer at like 4 in the morning. So don't use that.
Don't use an Elgato.
There wasn't like, there was barely anyone around that time as well too, unfortunately.
Oh no.
So like, there wasn't a lot of people that actually fixed that for a bit. It was a horror story. Never use the Elgato.
And so then some of your options, this is especially if you've made it a couple years, you got some sponsors, your professional options, a DataPath RGB card, a Yuantech capture card, or an X capture. Those are the cards that you want. They work, they're easy, they work with all sorts of different resolutions and frame rates, they won't blue screen your computer all the time. And something else you may want to look into is an OSSC setup. OSSC stands for Open Source Scan Converter. It's a device that takes your small retro game video and blows it up to HD in crisp quality with literally tens of thousandths of a second of delay. And so what's really nice about these, in addition to making everything look absolutely amazing, and if you'd like to see one in action, come find me in the practice room, because I usually use it, it allows you to streamline your old games and your new games into one card, which is real nice. Who wanted to talk about video splitters? Because this is important.
Yeah, video splitters, they're basically used to get the signal from a game console to both the capture card and the TV. So if you're doing an in-person marathon, I'd say it's pretty important. Depending on what kind of inputs you use, there's some really cheap composite and S-video splitters that are also powered. But once you get into like VGA or RGB, there's still some cheaper options, but yeah, the world of like RGB and video scaling is really amazing, yet also can be very expensive.
It's a black hole of money.
Yes.
The big thing with splitters, though, is make sure they're powered. If you
Yeah,
have an unpowered
absolutely.
splitter, it takes your signal and splits it into 2 half-powered signals. You're going to lose color fidelity. You're going to get weird, like, spotty effects and stuff like that, because the signal isn't meant to be that weak. So you need to use a powered splitter.
Yeah, don't even bother with unpowered ones, seriously.
Yeah.
And then a final note, races and multiple capture and multi-capture cards. So again, test everything. At any event that I run in person, I essentially don't allow races. They never work. Almost every consumer level capture card, your GVUSB, your StarTech, they aren't meant to work with multiple of them into the computer at the same time. You can sometimes get away with using 2 different cards, but even then, not always. That kind of, like the data flow from that, like the drivers aren't designed to have more than one at a time. If you're getting to the point where you have those professional solution cards, you can. Your best bet is something called essentially a multi-capture card, where it's a card that has multiple video inputs. And those things are ridiculously expensive, but they will work without a flaw. So if you're not sure if your marathon can handle races from a technical standpoint, I would just avoid it. I think it's just a bad idea. And again, test everything. If you really want to have a race, you need to get those 2 cards, you need to get 2 consoles, and you need to get your streaming PC and try it. So you don't end up like some of the marathons I've done where we've had the stream offline for an hour as we try to get 2 capture cards working.
My turn. Actually, one thing I did want to say to Proto's last point about races, I for one love doing races, much to, I guess, my own marathon me hates planning me, because races are great, but then when you're there and the capture cards don't work, it's awful. But the one horror story I have of that is the very first SSS we did. We had 4-person races, which is probably maybe not something you should do your first marathon.
Probably not.
And we had this one glitch where if we didn't turn on the capture cards in OBS in a very specific order, the computer blue screened. So we had to go like 1, 3, 2, 4, or else the computer just crashed. So maybe don't do 4-person races, or I don't know.
So actually, on that same note, if you're doing an online marathon, you can do a race, but make sure that their internet and their computer can handle watching 4 streams and restreaming at the same time, because you will crash their computer. Just throwing that out there.
All right, so I guess moving into this section, I know a lot of the things that people have talked about have to do with kind of large in-person events, online charity things. I kind of represent the more small community, just oriented events, so I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit of that, because those are becoming a little bit more prevalent. There's a lot more of those kind of coming around. One of the main kind of decisions you want to make if you're trying to do a community builder is, the first point up there, if you want to do a 24/7 schedule or not. Now, that's great for charity marathons. It's kind of going nonstop. You're getting a lot of viewers, a lot of donations. But when you're trying to just kind of, I'm going to say the words build your community a lot, and I apologize for that. When you're trying to do that, it's great because you get some off-stream time for everyone to just kind of hang out. And when you're on stream, you can't exactly, I don't know, make those kind of personal connections you would if you had some time off-stream. So, I mean, one con of that is that you do lose a little bit of viewership. Sometimes it picks up, like if you do like a 3-day marathon and you cut at 10 p.m., start at 10 a.m., you sometimes don't build back up. Like if you had a really, really good day 1, you might not get back there to day 2. Like we had 1,000 viewers day 1, and it comes day 2, we had like 250 all day. Like it's
because those hosts matter like a
Yeah.
lot.
Oh, yeah.
They
They
really
really
do.
do.
And when you drop the stream, you drop all the hosts, and
Yeah.
it's like,
like
ugh.
I think day 2 of the first SSS, we got a GDQ and SRL host, and so we had like 1,500 people, and then we had a bad PC setup block, and then the next day, it basically like it never happened.
Yeah.
So it really depends on if you're concerned with kind of channel popularity or kind of what you're doing in the background. I'm trying to remember what my second point is. I can't read from here.
Plan for off-stream activities.
Yes, I guess it kind of builds off the first point. For example, what we do, we always kind of had a plan of, we cut stream, and then, I mean, sometimes that plan does involve streaming, so we've done things like relay races of Mario 64, blind relay races, things like that. Going bowling, or if I'm using the latest event we did as an example, throw all of those plans out the window and play Secret Hitler for 12 hours.
Sure. One game.
One game.
Yeah.
It's more like a 6-hour game and then 6 more hours of analysis about that game.
So you say analysis, but you mean yelling at each other.
Yes.
Okay.
That's accurate.
All right.
And I kind of touched on the third point there, speedrunning versus non-speedrunning content. I mean, we are talking about setting up speedrunning marathons, so that is kind of the main point you want to do. But when you're trying to kind of have this kind of community feeling to it, sometimes you want to do maybe speedrun adjacent content. For example, first event we did a Mario World 96 exit relay race where everyone drew exits out of a hat. and we formed teams. So it's speedrunning, but also kind of just one more fun thing to do there.
Starting small and chat interaction.
Yeah.
Just a heads up though, we have like it's 2:51 right now.
Okay, well I'll skip the starting small thing. If yeah, it's about just scalability kind of thing. Chat interaction. Go ahead and we'll move to the last slide then. This is one thing that we do. I'm not sure if that's. I know some of the big events can't do this, but what we do is we have chat on a monitor that the whole crowd can read and interact with. And this is great because it helps the crowd really think that they're kind of there with you and really makes it more fun. But there's a couple cons under audio. I know, Proto, we were talking about this before. And
I guess, not really chat interaction, but audience interaction is a nightmare if you're not prepared for it. Because you have your runner with a headset that's 2 inches from their face talking at a normal volume, and then you have someone 3 feet away doing the same thing. That mic isn't going to pick them up. So if you're going to do chat audience interaction, you just need to be prepared for it. You need to have a crowd mic. What I've thought about doing for some of my events is have essentially a dedicated crowd mic that they can walk up to, or you could set up something that kind of captures the room, though that might not sound as good.
Yeah, and it's good if it works out because, you know, you sometimes have those 3 a.m. runs where no one's really wanting to watch it. You have one person sitting in the crowd. This really kind of helps with keeping the crowd on stream. But to the same effect, audio setup's terrible, and also the main point here is runner discretion. Some people really do not like people talking behind them. Mario RPG, you don't want that happening because people are going to drop super jumps, and it's happened. So it's kind of, if you're going to do it, be careful about it, I guess might be the point there.
All right.
Cool. Before we hop into Q&A, there's one thing I think all of us just kind of missed, but I wanted to talk about was staffing for your event. I wrote some notes down while we were there. But staffing is actually a really important thing, is making sure that your event is well staffed and you have people that sort of own separate areas of the event. It's really easy to get distracted, and if you're the event leader, right, and you take on more responsibility, like it's going to be tough to get things done. You're going to sort of stress out. It's a lot easier to spread out responsibility. So a couple key areas, excuse me, is submission/scheduling, social media/marketing. That includes like Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, even influencers, right? People that are coming to your event. You want them to talk about your event, help get the hype going. Graphics is another thing as far as broadcast, how the event's going to look, social media graphics, that sort of thing. Engineering and equipment, as we talked upon, audio and capture cards and everything is super, super crucial for the event. Floor planning is another thing. Sponsorships and on-site sponsor execution. That's one thing I've seen a couple events, they let go where if someone is purely dedicated to making sure all sponsor activations are hit, it makes you guys the hero and there's no issues. The worst thing you can do is, get money or equipment or whatever from a sponsor and you don't deliver. So that's a really big important note. On-site help is another thing, right? Having enough hands for setup, teardown. I can't explain enough how important that is, depending on the scale of your event. And then when you're also another thing is chat mods. I know we didn't talk about that, and especially if you're going to display the chat in a room, that is very important.
Very important.
Utilizing Nightbot or MoveBot is a good start, but making sure you have people that are actually modding as well.
You could do a whole panel on
chat.
Yeah.
And the last note I want to hit on that is when you guys are having meetings, not everyone's going to make it, so make sure that there's meeting notes and follow-up notes for people to catch up on so they know where you are at in the planning of your event.
Yeah.
Are there other notes you guys have before Q&A?
I don't think so. We have a couple minutes, I think, right? Q&A?
How much time do we have?
Can I
5
just
minutes?
the top marathon tips above everything else? I think we've said all of these, but test everything. Talk to other marathon staff. This is one thing I meant to mention. If you're trying to learn how to do tech, the best thing you can do is volunteer at tech for another event. See how they do it. So test everything, learn in advance, talk to the people who know, and divide your workload effectively. Make shifts for your restreamers, make sure you have all sorts of different dedicated staff, and make sure everyone is kind of in the same loop.
Yep. Sounds
Agreed.
Good.
Yeah.
Yep. So we have a couple minutes for Q&A, it looks like. So
Yeah. And a few of us will be staying outside after too if you guys have questions.
yeah, let's grab that. So the question for the video is, how do you handle internet at a venue when you're setting up a marathon?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is on the venue itself, right? Like setting expectations early, and we've been to venues where the internet was insanely expensive, or they didn't have pretty much enough bandwidth. That was a big thing for us. So we made sure, if you're running one stream and there's no online games or anything, I mean, you can get away with like 10 to 15 upload, but the higher you can get, the better. I think this year's Smash record, we had like 25 upload, 100 download or something. So if we need to download any games on the spot or any last minute issues came up, that was a big thing. So it's really venue dependent. If you're going to a convention center, you're going to get destroyed on pricing and union and everything like that.
A big thing with this, and like I just said it, test it. Go to that hotel that you're considering giving a ton of your money to and sit there for 5 hours with a computer streaming at 4,000 bit rate and see what happens. See how many frames you drop, see how difficult it is to connect, try turning on like 5 or 6 other devices and see what happens. You can set as many expectations as you want with the contract. If you don't go see what's going to happen yourself, you could still get screwed over. For the first Buckeye Speed Bash, we got the internet at the hotel was absolute crap. They promised us good internet with enough speed. That's not what we got. I ended up streaming like half of the first day of the marathon on Periscope on my phone. Like, get there and test it is kind of the biggest thing for that question.
Are there other questions?
Also, another thing too about internet, really quickly before we go into that, is that always, if you can, get a wired connection is way more reliable. It's very, very good. Get a wired connection. Get an Ethernet cable.
Yeah.
Get that. It's very important.
All right.
Very important.
Who's next?
I think we had a question over here.
So the question was, if you're setting up a marathon running for charity, are there any like specific charities for that?
I can take the lead on this.
Or how do you pick one?
Almost every event I do is charity. So I guess a couple tips. One thing you want to think about is whether you want to pick a charity and stick with it and grow, kind of like GDQ does. There's one for AGDQ, one for SGDQ. For Games Finished Adequately, we raise money for the Sick Kids Foundation every time. Conversely, for Power Up with Pride, we choose a different charity every event. For an in-person event, I would strongly recommend finding a local charity to raise money for. I mean, nationally known big-name charities are nice, but giving money to that small organization, maybe this is your first-time event, you'll only raise $700. That $700 means a lot to your local after-school programs outreach center. So if you're small, I would start small. And especially if you have an event whose identity is kind of hinged on a location, like our Buckeye Speed Bash in Ohio or your Midwest Speed Fest, pick a charity that matters to that place. Pick a charity that lines up with your values. So, the kind of marathon that you want to run, maybe look at the way that charity brands itself, the way it does outreach. Are they kind of back and professional and stiff? Is this charity, super hip with the kids? Find out what your marathon wants. Or I guess not even find out. What does your marathon want to do? Find a charity that will line up with your needs.
If the charity has a rapping dog, you've struck gold.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, but some of it is partnering as well. Like, you could get a charity the first marathon and it doesn't really work out, but maybe the next one does, and then you want to go back and create that partnership. And if you guys can grow together as an event, that's perfect.
That's a really big thing. Yeah. Find a charity that will work with you. In terms of, so I know how, for example, how GDQ does their budget is they negotiate a budget with the charity before the event. The charity gives them that money to make the event happen, and then 100% of the donations go directly to the charity. But even if you're not getting sponsorships, find a charity that's willing to work with you. One thing that's really difficult for startup marathons is how you get the money to the charity. The easiest solution is typically we have a marathon PayPal account. Well, guess what? Those donations coming into PayPal are going to get PayPal fees, and then when you send money from your PayPal to the charity's PayPal, it's going to get double feed, and suddenly that $2,500 you raised is $2,100. Find a marathon that's willing to work with you and look at, here's a hot tip, look at Tiltify. Tiltify.com is a wonderful service for connecting charities to speedrunning events or gaming events in general. Find a charity that's willing to say, yeah, sure, we'll sign up for a Tiltify account so you can raise for our event. If you're a big event, find a charity that's willing to do those sorts of budget negotiations with you.
I think we have time for one more.
Yeah, one
Is
more.
that correct? Cool.
All right.
And then you guys can grab us outside after, of course.
We should get one in back, probably. You had a question?
Any questions?
Yeah.
Devin?
So the question was, what is the process when acquiring a new sponsor for your marathon?
So, as mentioned earlier, I can even show you through the sponsor deck. But a big thing is being able, like, you need to build a pitch your event. You need to know everything about it. Having metrics if it's a first-time event, right? Making sure that you have people that will be involved. And again, if you're going to local market, it's really easy. Where they mentioned finding a local charity, they may even build Pride a venue for you, right? Where there's after-school programs or colleges or anything in the area. They may be able to help you out. So the main thing is how you're approaching them, what they can get out of it. Whether it's obviously you're raising money for them, but the social media impact, like a big thing too is not the money raised, but like for example, Smash the Record raised like $14,000 the first year for St. Jude. But a big win was the YouTube uploads got over 1 million views combined. So that was like a really big thing when 1 million people had seen a video that had the St. Jude logo present at all times. So a big thing is just going with them, knowing what you want, making sure it's realistic asks, and working with them on the whole process.
So I guess that'll be the panel.
Yeah.
If anybody has any other questions for us, we'll be hanging out outside the room here for a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Just grab a panelist and ask your question.
Yeah,
Thanks,
appreciate your
everyone.
time.
Test
Thanks for listening.
everything.
Thank you.
Test everything. Test everything.
All right.